Hello and good morning, everyone. Here from Islamabad, I am Firas Naqvi, the head of Iran program at Institute of Regional Studies, Islamabad. On the behalf of my colleagues, our President, Ambassador Johar Salim, I welcome all of you on this auspicious event, which is titled that Iran Nuclear Talks Post June 2025, a European Perspective. As we all know that when the US-Iran nuclear talks were going on, and the sixth round of talks was to be taken place, Iran was targeted by Israeli strikes, which eventually led to the 12-day war between Iran and Israel, and it was the first ever direct confrontation between the two states. However, not only that, the US also jumped in on June 22nd, and it struck three Iranian nuclear sites. And it basically devastated all of the hopes that was going on between Iran and the US in striking some sort of deal or some sort of compromise. And as a result, we have seen that Iran suspended its cooperation with IAEA, and there are reports. In fact, there are groups who are suggesting that Iran must also pull out from NPT. In this case, the European Union and the European parts are also thinking of holding the snapback sanctions on Iran if Iran is to move in this way. So, to understand all the dynamics from the European point of view, because we all know that at one state there is Iran, on the other state there is US and Israel, but it is basically the Europe which is struck in the dilemma between the rivalry of these two countries, because Europe has a strong security partnership with the US, but it also need energy for its economy and industrial output. And since there are sanctions on Russia, so it is quite vital for Europe to seek the alternative routes of energy. For that purpose, the lifting of sanctions perspective, we are joined by two very eminent speakers from Europe. Before moving on to our speakers, I would like to introduce both of them. Our first speaker is Miss Silvia Boltuc. Miss Silvia Boltuc is the founder and managing director of Special Eurasia, a geopolitical firm. She is also the international affairs specialist, business consultant, and political analyst who has supported private and public institutions in decision making by providing reports, risk assessments, and consultancy. Due to her work and reporting activities, she has traveled in Europe, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and the post-Soviet space, assessing the domestic dynamic and situations and creating a network of local contacts. She is also the director of Energy and Engineering Department at CSAM, and she also contributes in the Italian media agencies. She speaks Italian, English, German, and Russian. Welcome, Miss Sylvia Boltuc, and it's quite an honor and pleasure to have you again on our event. Our second speaker is Miss Dr. Sika Sadoddin. She is the independent researcher and former visiting scholar at Portland State University, USA. She's a French Iranian academic specializing in Middle Eastern politics. She holds a PhD in Middle Eastern Studies from University of Tehran and lectured at Tehran University, Shahid Bahishti University, and University. Her research explores the interplay between political identity, foreign policy, and regional strategy, with a particular focus on Iran, Saudi Arabia, and China's growing influence in the Persian Gulf. She was a visiting scholar at Portland State Universities, as discussed, and has published widely on regional security, multipolarity, and Middle Eastern foreign relations. Welcome, Dr. Sika, on our event.
Thank you.
So, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Sylvia Boltuc to start the conversation and to give the European perspective from the security economy dimensions on this recently Iran nuclear deal. Over to you, Ms. Sylvia.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for having me. If you don't mind, I'm going to share some slides.
Yes, for sure.
Give me just 1 second. You have, okay, right now. So can you see the slide?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay. Um, wait. Okay. So first of all, I made a very short recap of the history of the Iranian nuclear program. It started under the Shah rule and with the support of US and French. At that time, it was for civilian purpose, and it might be again even today, actually, as Iran often experience shortage of energy, so it can help also today. It was halted, of course, by two major events that hit Iran. First of all, the Iranian Revolution in 1910, the Iran-Iraq War. The program was revived during the 19th thanks to the assistance of Russia, specifically in the facilities of Bushehr. In the early 2000, concerns over Iran's nuclear intention grew after the exposure of undeclared facilities. And then we had a major turning point in 2015 as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was signed, restricting uranium enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief. Unfortunately, in 2018, the Trump administration unilaterally withdrew from the deal. And today we see again an attempt to negotiation to reestablish some sort of deal to revive the GCPO or another deal, a new one with Pezeshkian election. We experienced this new attempt, and then shortly after, we have unfortunately while in the phase where the negotiation were the most promising one, Israel attacked Iran. And shortly after, also the United States bombed Iranian nuclear facilities at Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz at Israel request, of course, halting the negotiation process. Um, so, the post-war talks. We have the A3, so Britain, France, and Germany. They have threatened to activate the 2015 Iranian nuclear deal snapback mechanism and reimpose all the United Nations sanctions unless Tehran resumed comprehensive collaboration with the agency, as well as negotiation with the US. And I think this last point is the most tricky one. At least at this stage. The E3 justifies snapback as necessary leverage to pressure Iran back to the negotiation table. They want Iran to resume talks with the agency, with the US, and most of all, they want to know the destiny of the enriched uranium after the US bombed the nuclear facilities in Iran. And right now, Iran is not sharing this information over security concerns. In a statement, the E3 foreign ministers reiterated that they will use the 30-day period before snapback is completed to engage in serious diplomatic efforts to restore Iran's compliance, although this seems not a diplomatic move, but more a coercive one. At the end of August, still, the director of the agency, Rafael Grossi, confirmed the restoration of the United Nations nuclear watchdog work in Iran. Indeed, there were some inspectors already in Iran. There are some risks associated with this snapback move. Although the announcement of the mechanism has already had some impact on Iran economy, as we saw on the economic market, trade with Europe has significantly declined over the years as Iran has been more and more isolated and under sanction, basically during the Islamic Republic entire life, leaving Brussels, of course, with limited leverage. This means that Iran likely will adapt to sanctions. This doesn't mean that there will be no impact, but they will able to adapt specifically because Iran is implementing, thanks also to regional alliance, some mitigating instrument tools such as swap agreements, exchanging in local currencies, and so on, or even connecting, for example, since Iran is not connected anymore to the SWIFT international system, they connected with the Russian MIR system. It will further push Iran to seek access to Eastern markets and partners, as we experienced already under the Eurasia administration, but it's also the policy under Pezeshkian, as it was defined by the supreme leader. Iran is adopting a strategy to look at East, and this was because of the failure during the decades of all the negotiation over the nuclear deal. By deepening Iran's isolation, the measure risks hiding regional instability, and we can speak an entire hour, I think, about this sentence, since, of course, the balances inside the Gulf also are changing. Relation with China, with Russia, with the Gulf cooperation countries, and so on. Europe appears to be prioritizing interests of Washington and Tel Aviv over diplomacy, and this is one of the major concerns. As I already stated, they are not taking into consideration the consequences of such a coercive policy. So, what is Iran's point of view? As I already say, adopting a confrontational approach is likely to deepen Iranian mistrust, which is at the moment really high after the attack by Israel. There was a very controversial statement made by the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and he stated that by bombing Iran, Israel was doing the dirty work for all the Western world, or actors, or at least the European one. Therefore, of course, for Tehran perspective, Israel's strike serves also European interest. And so if you don't trust your counterpart, it's difficult to have negotiation. Iranian officials furthermore suspect that the agency, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has shared sensitive information with Israel intelligence. And this is another very tricky fact. And the strike indeed not only targeted the nuclear facility, but also destroyed residential buildings where nuclear scientists lived. By aligning with Israel, again, Europe fools, of course, Iranian suspicious and further erodes trust. Indeed, we have seen some very heated headlines in the Iranian media, particularly connected to the hardliners. The timing of Israel attack is another important factor, as Iran doesn't feel that negotiation, that being open to the West will provide some security guarantee. This perception is compounded by the fact that the European leaders refrain from condemning Israel attacks towards Iran, while the retaliation attack from Iran towards Israel was condemned. So again, there is mistrust. And since the signing of the JCPOA, and especially after the US unilaterally withdrew from the deal, the Supreme Leader has regarded Washington as an unreliable negotiation partner. So what happened now? On September 9, the foreign minister, the Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, and the agency, they signed in Cairo, Egypt, another agreement, at least putting the base of a framework to negotiate. And of course, because Iran also threatened to leave the NPT agreement. In public remarks, the agency board of governors grossly declared that the agreement will open the way for the respective inspection and access, specifically including all the facility installation in Iran, and that it also contemplates the required reporting on all the attacked facilities, including the nuclear material presented at those. And this was a very controversial statement, which heated the Iranian lawmakers. Indeed, let's take a step back. In July, after the June attack by Israel, Iran's parliament has agreed to suspend all cooperation with the agency, and Iran's President Pezeshkian cited this law adopted by the Iranian Majlis, halting the cooperation with the agency, and moreover threatened to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Iranian parliament was set to vote on this withdrawal on September 8, although it was postponed under Araghchi request to give space and time to a possible new agreement with the agency. So what's the problem right now? Inside, in remarks made by Grossi infuriated the Iranian parliament, which of course stressed that before declaring that the agreement can be implemented, it must be approved by the Majlis. Araghchi attempted to clarify that the agreement would not allow access, as Grossi stated, to the facilities at Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan, which were bombed by the United States. and of course confused over the conflicting statements made by the foreign minister Arakci and Grossi. Iranian lawmakers requested an urgent parliamentary session to review the Cairo agreement, although it did not still take place. Nevertheless, Iran's Supreme National Security Council stated that the details of the agreement had been reviewed by the Council Nuclear Committee and confirmed the approval of the Cairo agreement. So this highlights at least a contrast between the executive and legislative branch inside Iran. Why this? Why this happened? Why the President Pezeshkian and the executive is still working on an agreement, although there have been this major attack by Israel? Because Pezeshkian was elected on a platform emphasizing negotiation and engagement with the West, like it was Rouhani before him, and upholding his campaign, of course, promises strengthens its political legitimacy inside the country. On the other side, appearing to capitulate to external pressure could weaken its position internally, particularly, as I already said, among hardliners. Iran economy still remains heavily affected by sanctions, and of course, reviving the nuclear deal could facilitate sanctions relief for investment and access to international banking system. Let's not forget that starting with the Raisi government and now under Pezeshkian, Iran has implemented a lot of free economic zone, industrial economic zone, is really trying to push the economy of the country. And of course, being relief from sanction will give a major boost to the country's economy. Another reason is that the nuclear agreement offers a diplomatic buffer, potentially reducing the likelihood of further attack, whether it's from the US or from Israel, therefore strengthening domestic defense. And I want also to add that, of course, the sanction might also hit the defense industry. So therefore, Iran will not be as able as without sanction to reinforce its defensive capabilities. Returning to the JCPOA framework strengthened also Iran's diplomatic position with European and Asian partners, including Russia and China, of course. By demonstrating willingness to negotiate, Iran could divide the US, Europe, and Israel strategically, or at least hinder their capacity to use its contrasting behavior, its confronting behavior, let's say an excuse for further punitive measures. Signing or pushing an agreement could allow Iran to project an image of responsible, law-abiding state, countering narratives of aggression, which is something on which the government is still working since many years. So, which are the European objectives? Officially, Europe aims to ensure that Iran's nuclear program remains peaceful, civilian, and within the limits set by the JCPOA. Brussels seeks to prevent a regional arms race that could destabilize the Middle East, although adopting such a coercive attitude towards Iran may have the opposite effect. And by engaging Iran diplomatically, the Brussels preserves its role as a mediator and maintain influence over both Iran and Washington, of course, since it's, as I said before, the re-engaging with the US after Washington bombed Iran, it's more tricky than re-engaging with the European Union. European Union also seeks to prevent Iran from drifting fully toward Russia and China. We also see that Russia and China has a very active part in the negotiation. They try to, they say they wrote a letter to the foreign minister of these three countries wrote a letter in which they state that actually it is unfair to punish Iran since it was the US that withdrew unilaterally from the JCPOA. And so right now it is basically not fair to utilize or to treat Iran with this snapback mechanism since it was in the first place the US that withdrew from the agreement. So while publicly the US stressed diplomacy, they are tacitly supports Iran's security concern regarding Iran's nuclear potential. So it's not just that Brussels is concerned or that Iran is necessarily a priority of Europe, but it's a priority of Israel. And therefore, given that Israel is one of our major allies, Iran has become a priority, specifically its nuclear program. Indeed, they are not so focused on the nuclear program of any of the other regional countries. This alignment is mostly strategic by backing strong signals of containment, such as sanctions, diplomatic pressure. Brussels indirectly shares Israel's objective of slowing Iran's nuclear capabilities, although we have to say that even the CIA, even Grossi, in the aftermath of Israel attack, they have all reported that there are no evidence that Iran is indeed working on nuclear weapons. By endorsing, of course, Israel regional policy while disregarding Iran's security concerns, such by failing to condemn Israel attack on Iran or Iranian diplomatic mission abroad. Let's remember that Israel also attacked the embassy in Damascus, the consulate. European Union risk accusation of applying double standards, and this is very tricky. We already see what happened with the Ukrainian conflict, and it's a dangerous path. Of course, they want to avoid also an Iranian military retaliation against the Gulf neighbors. Gulf countries are Western allies, and Iran has multiple times stated that in case they offer their help to Israel for an attack towards the directed at the Islamic Republic, they will retaliate against the Gulf countries. So, trying to stabilize the region, we are pursuing negotiation. Member states are also balancing domestic political pressure. Let's remember that particularly, for example, Germany, the country hosts a huge Iranian diaspora, and they have, of course, internal pressure. France and Germany aim to appear tough on Iran while preserving their economic interests. Europe wants also, and this is a strategic goal in case the sanction will be lifted, access to Iranian energy and trade opportunity on sanctions are lifted or eased. And this will be particularly strategic in our energy diversification policy in the aftermath of the Ukrainian crisis. And particularly Germany, France, and Italy, they have significant commercial stakes in Iranian infrastructure, energy, and industry sector. So let's go. Let's take a look at Germany. Although never openly mentioning to seek the collapse of the Islamic government in June 2025, as already said, Merz acknowledged that the significant weakening of Iran's leadership following Israel and US strike on its nuclear facilities. He stated that the regime would likely not return to its former strength, casting uncertainties over the country's future. At the conference in Berlin on July 2025, the former vice president of German intelligence services suggested that only regime change from within, led by Iranian people, could bring lasting peace and Tehran's support from terrorism. And Tehran's support for terrorism. So he emphasized that lasting change in Iran must come from within. And moreover, which we will address in the following slide, he praised the National Council of Resistance of Iran and its 10-point plans as a serious political alternative. So basically, Germany is indirectly supporting some kind or welcoming some kind of regime change inside the country. On the other side, Germany accounts for 30% of Iran's total trade with the European Union. What? I cannot hear you. Again, please.
Sorry, it was a technical error. You may continue.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Then we have France, completely opposite position, and this also underlines how France it's more strategic when it comes to geopolitics, and it proves that France has been active in multiple foreign environment, and it's more skilled, if you want to put it in these words. President Emmanuel Macron has warned against attempt to change the Iranian regime by force, describing such an action as strategic mistake, probably foreseeing the destabilization that this will follow. He emphasized the importance of returning to discussion to address nuclear and ballistic issues and cautioned that external military intervention have consistently failed to bring stability. Let's remember that France was one of the countries that under the Shah initiated the nuclear program, the Iranian nuclear program, together with the government. French firms, notably Total Energies, have sought Iranian energy contracts when sanctions allow. Paris, therefore, has an interest in predictable sanctions regime that can be easy in exchange for compliance. So there is an interest. So I mentioned it before, the National Council of Resistance of Iran. What is this? It is the political wing of Mojahedin Khalq, Khalq also considered, also listed and delisted and then relisted as a terrorist organization, depending on the historical period. In November 2025, Mariam Rajavi, the current president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, addressed a large meeting in the European Parliament. The event was attended by many members of the European Parliament from different political groups who discussed the current situation in Iran. And most important, the prospect for democratic change in the country. In June 2025, again, the European Parliament hosted a major conference addressing the escalating crisis emanating from Iran. The conference featured again the leader Mariam Rajavi. In July 2025, following, the Italian Parliament hosted a conference on Iran, where discussions centered on supporting democratic change in the country, in Iran, and again, she was the leading guest. So why is this so important? Because, and creates mistrust in the current Islamic government of Iran, because Mariam Rajavi and the National Council of Resistance of Iran have put forward a transition program centered on their 10-point plan, which of course can take place just if the Islamic Republic will collapse. It foresees the establishment of a provisional government, maximum 6 months, tasked with holding free election. And according to their own framework, Mariam Rajavi will serve as president-elect during this interim period. So basically, even if the European countries do not endorse publicly regime change in Iran, but by hosting this kind of event, and I would say particularly also the Italian government, they are sending like tricky messages, controversial messages to the government of Iran. So, not less important, of course, European countries are interested in resuming trade relations with Iran, particularly in sectors like the energy and infrastructure. Iran has a very, very strategic geographical position. I focus, since I'm Italian, I want to share some development regarding the Italian government towards Iran, because I think that inside Europe, the Italian government is the less tough when it comes to Iran compared to France and Germany. Indeed, on June this year, 2025, it was a few days before the Israeli offensive in Tehran hosted the 5th round of bilateral political consultation between Italy and Iran. They stressed that they wanted to strengthen cooperation. It's not the first time, of course, they're moving forward. Among European nations, as I already mentioned, Italy enjoys preferential relation with Iran, grounded in long-lasting historical connection, and this provides diplomatic agility in sensitive consular matter. For example, we see then when an Italian citizen is arrested in Iran compared to other European citizens, maybe a German one, a French one, usually the situation resolves in a shorter period. This is because there is a particular relation between the Italian government and the Iranian government, although we don't have to forget, of course, that we are one of the US major partners. We are one of the Israel major partners, and this is something that our Minister Giorgia Meloni constantly stressed. Still, the Italian energy company Eni established throughout history in Iran some partnerships that were widely recognized for their fairness during the 50s and 60s. In fact, under the leadership of Enrico Mattei, Eni was among the first Western firms to pursue a more balanced and equitable approach to energy relations with Iran. Specifically, Mattei sought to implement agreements based on a 50-50 profit sharing model, a significant departure from the dominant practice of the so-called Seven Sisters. And we can see that this past experience still influence today relation between Iran and Italy. as compared to relation, for example, towards the UK, because there is still this country's memory regarding the oil and gas sector. In the 2000, it resumed Operation Iran through its participation in K Energy project, most notably with the National Iranian Oil Company and Petropars. And then we have tourism collaboration that are quietly growing. They are expanding with plans for Iran and enhanced participation in Italy's Tourism Expo. This means, and we have also, I will not go too much into details, but we have also some agreement regarding the tourist sector. From a geopolitical standpoint, Rome has recently hosted nuclear talks between the United States and Iran, and I think it's not a surprise. This underscores again that there is trust between Iran and Rome, and on the other side, that Rome is also a trustworthy ally from the US. Although, as I mentioned, Giorgia Meloni has been Israel's closest partners. And I have to say that some exponent of the current Italian government are supporters whether of the return of the Shah or of the MEC group, and they also opted both of them. And then last, the Italian government has demonstrated a pragmatic, economically driven approach rather than an ideological one. This is another thing that favors Italy because usually Germany, France, when they want to establish trade agreements, they come also with a request connected to human rights and ideological requests, while Italy is more pragmatic. Another important thing, and I will conclude with these maps because I think that's really, really important. Right now, we need to diversify our energy environment, and since the northern corridor, which we see in this map running through Russia, is not anymore an option to connect, for example, Central Asia to Europe, where we are trying to get the oil and gas. The European Union is pushing the middle corridor. The middle corridor will connect China through Central Asia. We see in the map Kazakhstan, the Caspian Gulf, basically the entire Turkish bloc through Turkey to Europe. And in case the sanction will be lifted, I want to stress that Iran has proved oil reserve, which places it third globally in the OPEC producer. And when it comes to gas, it's the second for gas reservoir globally after Russia. So it's an immense reservoir that might really help the European energy diversification process. And if we look at the map, Iran is clearly more closely connected to Europe than Central Asia, than of course, and Russia is not anymore a possibility. So Italy might, thanks to its position in the Mediterranean Sea, may be the final node of possible gas pipeline, oil pipeline connecting Iran to Turkey to Italy. This is not something that Turkey will likely welcome, since it's trying to establish the Turkish bloc as the major provider of energy security towards Europe. But still, Turkey can earn some fees from transition fees in case Iran will be connected to Europe to provide energy. And that's it. Thanks for your attentions. Of course, I'm open to questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Silvia. It was indeed a comprehensive presentation on the European perspective. You have talked about different aspects. You have talked about the divisions within the European countries, about how to approach towards Iran. You have also discussed about the public presentation of European countries vis-a-vis Iran, as well as hosting some sort of diaspora which share resentments towards Iran. For example, you have mentioned about NCR NCRI and how the head of NCRI has been talking to the various European parliaments, including the Italian one. You have also mentioned that how the statements from some of the European countries and the acts that some of the European countries has played by not condemning Israeli strikes on Iran, but condemning the Iranian retaliation has created the seeds of mistrust between Iran and the European partners, and it could really push Iran towards seeking alternative routes and towards seeking alternative partners, particularly in the Eastern Front. And then individually, you have talked about the German response and ideology in countering Iran, the French role as well as the Italian role, and you have mentioned that Germany and France are sort of more harsh towards Iran, while the Italy basically prefers, despite having relations with US, despite having relations with Israel, Italy basically prefers the commercial ties between Iran, and that is what basically matters. And this is what the European partners are basically seeking to to cultivate some sort of win-win situation for both Iran as well as the European partners. And it was indeed the basically the purpose of holding this webinar. So now I would like to move towards our second speaker, Dr. Sika, and I would like to know from you, Dr. Sika, that how the US views its European partners and what are the US expectations from its European partners in dealing with Iran. Over to you, Dr. Sika.
Exactly. Let me first share my PowerPoint. Apparently, I cannot share my PowerPoint. Can you do it from your part for me and then switch the slides as well? Yeah, Frost, can you hear me? Can you? Yeah. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. I don't know what's the problem. Thank you. And if possible, please kindly switch each slides for me when I mention. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. And first of all, thank you for dear Frost for your kind introduction, for your warm introduction. I just start with the point that to understand where we are now, we must look back at the broader trajectory of US-Europe relations in the Middle East in general and in the case of Iran's nuclear program in particular. So my presentation is some kind of theoretical one. So I'll start with President Trump's general approach to Europe in the region, then narrow down to his handling of the Iran nuclear deal. After that, I'll apply some theoretical frameworks to explain US-Europe, dynamics before comparing the approaches of Obama, Trump, and Biden. Finally, I'll outline what Washington expects from Europe in 2025 as we approach, remember, the critical October 18 deadline. So, I start with Trump's general approach to Europe in the Middle East. Trump's worldview was fundamentally skeptical of Europe's role in the Middle East. He frequently, criticized NATO allies for failing to spend enough on defense, portraying them as overly reliant on U.S. military protection in general. He often suggested that problems like, migration flows or terrorist threats is Europe's burden, not America's. So, importantly, he distrusted EU diplomacy, framing it as weak and conciliatory. Remember, I'm talking about the first terms of President Trump's, not the second. Instead of working through, multilateral frameworks, Trump preferred direct and bilateral deals. Think of Abraham Accords between Israel and Arab states, for instance. In short, Europe wasn't treated as a central partner in Middle East strategy, but more as a marginal or even obstructive actor. That's the point. In the next slide, implications of Trump's general approach. This approach had, of course, had major implications. First, Europe was sidelined in regional diplomacy, and Trump placed U.S. leverage and hard power at the center of Middle East policy, and saw little reason to coordinate with Brussels. For instance, in conflicts like, Syria and Libya, European efforts at mediation had almost no role in U.S. decision-making. The broader message was clear. Solving Middle East conflicts was America's domain, not Europe's. This reinforced the idea of the U.S., as the dominant actor and Europe's as secondary. In the next slide, in his first term as president of the U.S., Trump critic very overly of JCPOA, and of course, Trump applied the same logic to the Iran nuclear deal, or JCPOA. He described it as a horrible one-sided agreement. His major objections, of course, were the sunset clauses, which means restriction would expire after a few years, and the absence of limits on Iran's missiles program, and the fact that it didn't cover, of course, regional proxies such as Hezbollah. Trump argued that sanctions relief enriched the Iranian regime. In 2018, as we all know, he withdrew the U.S. from the JCPOA and launched a maximum pressure campaign of sweeping sanctions. Remember, he didn't just criticize the deal's content, he rejected the multilateral framework itself. In the next slide, Trump's view of European allies on JCPOA. Trump, of course, expected the Europeans, UK, France, and Germany to fall in line after Washington's withdrawal. But instead, first, initially, the E3 reaffirmed their commitment to the deal, insisting it was the best way to contain Iran's program. However, Trump leveraged America's dominance of the global financial system. Through secondary sanctions, Europe companies were forced to choose between access to US markets and doing business with Iran. The choice, of course, was obvious. They pulled out of Iran. So while Europe resisted rhetorically, in practice it complied. For Trump, Europe was a junior partner expected to follow America's lead, not shape policy independently. And remember, at that time, Bolton's threat about European sanctions was unprecedented. He said America was willing to penalize its closest allies for following an agreement they had co-created. So this represents a move from partnership to coercion within alliance. That's tricky. In the next slide, consequences for transatlantic relations, which this is the emphasis of my presentation. The result was a widening rift, of course, in transatlantic relations. The Europeans tried to salvage the JCPOA by creating INSTEX, a financial mechanism to bypass US sanctions, but in practice, it was largely symbolic. European firms prioritized access to the US markets over Iran, so INSTEX never gained real traction. We saw a similar pattern, as you can witness. Politically, Europe tried to defend the deal. Materially, it adapted to Washington's pressure. This episode, of course, highlighted the limits of European autonomy and the strengths of US economic leverage. Bolton quotes, of course, shows willingness to use economic leverage against allies. That's so clear. In the next slide, I used just 3 theoretical frameworks to make it much more clear the very nature of this alliance. The first theory is alliance politics and hierarchy. Theoretically, this reflects alliance politics. The US-Europe relationship is hierarchical. What that means is that the stronger partner, in this case the US, set the agenda, and the weaker partner, Europe, may voice objections but is structurally constrained. So with the JCPOA, this hierarchy was clear. Europe had the political will to keep the deal alive, but lacked the material tools to resist US sanctions. Washington's dominance effectively overrode European preferences. So arguably for this very reason, during Trump's second term, particularly after June 2025, Europe increasingly aligned itself both symbolically and substantively with the US approach towards Iran's nuclear program, while simultaneously striving to preserve the appearance of autonomy in articulating its own national interests. In the second theoretical framework, which we call junior partner syndrome, this is what scholars sometimes call the junior partner syndrome, and the junior partners in alliances often express symbolic independence. They want to appear, as tough. They are making autonomous decisions, but in reality, they adapt to the preferences of the stronger partner. So in this case, Europe's defense of the JCPOA was a perfect example. While rhetorically independent, materially, Europe fell into line with Washington's sanctions regime in practice. In the next and the last theoretical framework, dependency theory and strategic autonomy, which is the most important theoretical framework, explain why Europe couldn't break free. Europe is deeply reliant on US financial markets, US technology, and US security guarantees through NATO. By applying secondary sanctions, the US weaponized this dependency, in fact. Europe tried to push back with tools like Instex and the blocking statute, but these were ineffective. The episode fueled a debate about, strategic autonomy within Europe. The idea that the EU should reduce its reliance on Washington, but autonomy remained aspirational in practice. So dependency, of course, persisted. Now, in order to elucidate the nature of this relationship, a brief comparative examination of the approaches adopted by 3 US presidents toward Europe, particularly with respect to the Iranian nuclear issue, to me it seems is undertaken. First, Obama's approach. Under Obama, the approach was multilateral. He saw the E3 as indispensable partners in building the JCPOA. He repeatedly credited allies for the success of sanctions regime and the eventual deal. Obama emphasized that sanctions worked only because allies were unified. He accepted that the JCPOA was a compromise, but believed it was the best peaceful way to stop Iran from building a bomb. In Trump's approach, it was the polar opposite. He rejected the multilateralism and withdrew from the JCPOA unilaterally in 2018. Instead of coordinating with Europe, he expected them to follow Washington or suffer consequences. He dismissed EU diplomacy as weak and unhelpful. His strategy pivoted toward aligning with Israel and Gulf states, sidelining European input altogether. That's the point. In fact, Europe went from co-decision maker under Obama to pressured junior partner under Trump. In Biden's approach, Biden tried to restore some balance. He worked with the E3 in Vienna to negotiate a US return to the JCPOA framework, but those efforts stalled because of Iranian escalation and, of course, US domestic politics. Biden emphasized the importance of alliances in rhetoric, but the reality was that the US retained decisive leverage. Coordination with Europe was closer than under Trump, but still, in comparison to the Obama's era, constrained by American power and domestic constraints. So in a comparative overview, the next slides, to summarize the comparison, Obama was a multilateral enforcer treating Europe as a co-decision maker. Trump was a unilateralist treating Europe as a pressured junior partner, and Biden was a conditional multilateralist, seeking coordination but retaining US primacy. The common thread is asymmetry. Regardless of style, Washington holds the dominant position and Europe adapts. What changes is how much respect and space Europe is given. However, in all three cases, the US has remained the actor that defines the character, extent, and mode of Europe's engagement. In the next slide, US expectations from Europe in 2025. Finally, what does the US expect exactly from Europe now? The immediate focus is on October 18, termination day, because after that day, the snapback mechanism under UN Security Council Resolution 2231 expires. If Iranian remains non-compliant, the US wants Europe to be ready to act before then. Expectations including aligning with Washington on sanctions, grounding all decisions in IAEA rulings, especially the June 2025 non-compliance resolution, and of course, closing loopholes in financial and shipping networks. Publicly, the US expects a unified message to prevent Iran from exploiting divisions. Finally, Washington wants cooperation on secondary issues like ballistic missiles and, of course, UAV exports to Russia and Iran's proxies even now. However, the nuclear file remains the top priority. In short, Washington expects Europe to stand firm, coordinate closely, and act decisively before the October deadline. Let me conclude by emphasizing that while US approaches to the Iran nuclear file have differed across administrations, the underlying asymmetry in transatlantic relations remains constant. What will matter most in 2025 is not only Washington's leverage, but also Europe's capacity and willingness, of course, to act in concert with the United States ahead of the October deadline. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sika. It was indeed a explanatory presentation vis-a-vis the US-EU relations and what the US expects from its European partners. You have started by mentioning that Trump has always been skeptical about the Europe's commitment in the NATO defense, and in fact, you have mentioned that you have basically used the terminology of under-investing on the behalf of the European partners. You have also mentioned that Europe has always been treated as a junior partner, as a secondary partner, and it was only the US who takes the dominant role when it comes to the security and geopolitics of the Middle East. You have also mentioned how the Trump basically criticized JCPOA, and it basically weaponized the sanctions threat to its most of the secure partners and to most of its closer partners which are based in Europe. Then you have also mentioned that Europe tried to create some sort of alternative mechanism like the one of Intex, but it was rather symbolic. And because of this, Europe basically aspires to practice its strategic autonomy, but it remains short of implementing that. And you have elaborated that via three theoretical frameworks. Number one, the hierarchical alliance in the case of Europe and US. The second one was junior partner syndrome, and the last one was dependency theory. And then you have also basically compared the approaches between three US president President Obama, President Trump, and President Biden. And to cut it short, you have basically mentioned that Obama was pro-alliance president, and he was basically a multilateral enforcer. It gave the similar sort of value to its European partners. However, when it comes to Trump, it was basically a unilateralist, traditional unilateralist, and basically rejected the equal role of European partners when it comes to dealing with Iran. And when it comes to Biden, it basically he basically followed the limited form of alliances, and he was basically a conditional multilateralist. And to conclude, you basically mentioned that US expects Europe to trigger the snapback sanctions before the termination date, that is October 18, and to tighten the enforcement mechanism, as well as to address the secondary issues like that of the Iranian role in the region, Iranian escalation in the region, as well as Iranian alliances with its proxy partners. However, the nuclear issue remains the top priority. So, with this, we came to the end of the presentation part, and now I would like to open the floor for the question and answer. Before moving on to the questions raised by our audience, I would have some of my own questions, and I would like to start with Miss Sylvia. Ms. Sylvia, you have mentioned that it was Iran who was forced to comply by IAEA because of the snapback mechanism, and it was basically a tool on the hands of the European partners. But do you really think that such sort of pressurizing tactics would work for Iran, specifically mentioning that the termination date is only a month away? So, do you think that it would not only embolden Iran to to become a rogue state from a pariah state and seek closer partnerships with China and Russia, as well as the Gulf countries? You have specifically in the context of Israeli escalation beyond the Iranian territory, as we have all witnessed that Israel attacked the Qatar, the long-term US ally, and US didn't do anything to secure Qatar from the Israeli attack. And it was rather Iran who not only condemned, but also participated in the Arab Islamic Summit in Doha. So, do you think that while having the alternative routes in the region as well as in the Eastern Front, Iran could seriously consider the snapback threat from the Europe?
Yes, I think that Europe is losing leverage. From some perspective, of course, the US have more leverage on Iran than Europe does, for obvious reasons. And I think that, for example, the recent agreement in the defense field between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, it's part of what is happening in the region. So we don't have to talk only about Iran, but I think that by attacking Qatar, Israel made a mistake. The regional powers are reorganizing. They are afraid. They don't perceive anymore US security guarantees as effective. And they are like, I will not say that they are necessarily now becoming ally with Iran, but they are seeing now the reasons from Iran. They are endorsing a little bit more Iranian position, and they might move. Also, we saw this day during the last days, there was this suggestion made by Egypt to create like Islamic or Arab version of NATO. They don't feel they feel threatened. They don't feel that they are any more guarantee about their security. And this is also because during the I want to say the war, it's not correct. Actually, the offensive of Israel towards Gaza and towards other Arab nations, Israel has made it very clear throughout the years with public statements that it will not end with West Bank and with Gaza, but they want to enlarge and take back of other Middle Eastern countries. And therefore, this country, they are starting to be afraid because they don't see from US part, at least not publicly, that there are any kind of guarantee or reassurance in this regard. For this reason, I think that Iran feels a little bit emboldened, feels that, okay, we are not alone anymore in this situation. On the other side, when it comes to the economic point of view, the economic perspective, the leverage, for example, imposing sanction on Russia was completely another situation, because Russia has a really high turnover, trade turnover with Europe and also with the US, actually. And of course, sanctions really hit the country, although the country is quite doing well by reorganizing. With Iran, the leverage is not that huge, because throughout the decades, Iran has constantly been isolated, and therefore the trade turnover with the Western world is not that high that they can really impact the economy. Of course, this will have an impact. We should also consider that the Islamic government is afraid also of the impact of new sanction on the population. The population will be afraid. We already see that just the news about the possible snapback mechanism taking place has affected the market. So we see that there is a tension coming from the Iranian population. They are afraid, of course, of enduring worse economic situation inside the country. So they have to balance like the real economic impact that might not be that huge, but also with the perception of the people with a decline economic situation. On the other side, I think that the move made by China and Russia has been very clear, and they are backing Iran right now in the Security Council, and they're trying to defend Iran position. Practically, basically, all three countries are under sanction right now for different reasons. And so, although they are competing actors, because from a geopolitical point of view, they have some scenarios in which they are competing, but being under sanction, being forced by the West in this critical position, although I don't want to say that they don't have some responsibilities, of course, but being pushed in this situation, of course, brought them together. And they are reorganizing. And I think that's the most dangerous thing. We're getting to the point that first of all, Europe is declining from a political perspective, from unity perspective, and also from an economic perspective. And we are getting to the point which we are not that needed anymore by these countries, because they are reorganizing. They have in the bloc emerging economies like the Asian part of Eurasia, of course, is experiencing the most growth in economy from the economical perspective. And so I think that this is dangerous for us, because by pushing them away from us, we will get to the point where they will be not interested anymore in trade with us or having this kind of connection. And we are also bringing together countries that might be also a threat for us, of course, because on the other side, we have to endorse also European position, the Western position, and these countries, of course, coming together. We see that there are different actors with nuclear weapons, not Iran right now, but, neighboring countries have also nuclear capabilities. And so this might be dangerous if we push too far. Therefore, I stressed multiple times during my presentation that I would rather prefer a more diplomatic effort and a more fair approach towards Iran. And I think that Iran will be more open to sit at the table and negotiate. And in conclusion, also some security guarantee that during the negotiation there will be no attack, as happened to Iran, as happened to Qatar. And furthermore, if Iran complies with a new agreement, with the revival of the old one, it doesn't matter, but there will be security guarantees. And of course, also about the information that the inspectors collect when they visit the nuclear facilities. It's not acceptable that they share eventually this information with other countries' intelligence, particularly with countries that are basically enemy of Iran. Iran needs this assurance. On the other side, of course, Iran has to concede something.
Very well, very well. Dr. Sika, you have mentioned when it comes to the US-European relations in the Middle East, that when it comes to the sharing the stage, US is always treated as a secondary partner. But when
Yeah.
it comes to sharing the responsibility, we have seen that Europe is there on the forefront. For example, let's take the example of the June conflict between Iran and
Mhm.
Israel. The Iranian missiles were intercepted not only by the US or Israel itself, but there were the air force present in the skies of the Middle East by the by the French as well as by the British. So why is this dichotomy? If Europe thinks that it is being treated as a secondary partner, and mind that Israel is not a NATO member country, so it is not an obligation for the European countries to protect Israel
Mhm.
in its conflict. We can
Mhm.
understand when it comes to the Ukraine because there is a linkage of European bond, but
Mhm.
it is not the case with Israel. So why is this dichotomy that when it comes to responsibility, Europe is there, but when it comes to taking the benefit or taking the leverage, US has always treated Europe at the backbench.
So the emphasis on, I mean, my focus is on that point that you cannot look at your alliance as only just, responsible stakeholder and expect of course neglect him in the process of decision making, and just look at him as a, I mean, responsible stakeholder, and then expect your allies more and more. So Europe, in I mean in the US approach, Europe is a symbolic resistance but a practical accommodation. So when you look at your alliance just like that, so you can not expect it to work for you as a decision maker. Using Randall-Scholler, theoretical framework, US sees him as a lion, provides, ultimate security guarantees to its allies, but simultaneously it's engaged in, remember, in offshore balancing and delegates responsibilities to its alliances. And of course, thereby assuming its alliances as the lioness. Ultimately, but of course, ultimately the lioness should subordinate to the lion. So that's why, based on Randall-Scholler theory of the balance of benefit, at the same time, the US compels Europe to bear greater cost and assume increased responsibilities. So that's why it can be argued that Europe is bandwagoning at the same time with the US on the basis of a balance of benefits. So if you if you look at me as just a responsible stakeholder, not a decision maker, it's up to me to try to, to push me as a decision maker in the process. And just remember, Europe's primary advantage in the international area lay in its diplomatic and normative power, an asset the US was eroding, through direct negotiations with Iran. So consequently, Europe perceived alignment with US positions on the Iranian nuclear issue or in general as the pathway to sustaining its role and, to weigh its role in the process of decision making.
Thank you, Dr. Sika. There is a question on the behalf of my colleague, Mr. Hamza Rifat, who is the head of Central Asia program here at Institute of Regional Studies, and the question is directed to both of you. You can answer one by one. And he asked, and I quote, that how do European capitals where you guys reside view the Saudi Arabia and Pakistan Defense Pact? And do you consider that such an agreement could be a direct threat to Iran's security and prospects for reviving the JCPO agreement? Starting from you, Ms. Sylvia.
All these platforms are making our arguments.
Okay. Well, I don't think that it's right now, at least, I don't think that's a threat to Iran for several reasons. First of all, because as I mentioned before, it's not a, let's say, a friendship between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but they are, they have reestablished relation. They are trying to reestablish also trade, according also, of course, as much as possible with sanction. They are trying also to talk, to have in common organization, which is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which might be OPEC. They're trying to move forward more stable relation. And also, I have to say that in the past there have been also some really positive stances coming from both Mohammed bin Salman and or the Saudi government and from Iran, so towards each others. And therefore, I think that compared to a few years ago, when we saw also Iranian proxies attacking the oil infrastructure of Saudi Arabia, a lot has changed. On the other side, I think that when it comes to Pakistan and Iran, yes, the two countries have publicly good relation. There have been also some diplomatic incidents throughout the years. But on the other side, I think that right now they perceive the same threat. Indeed, I remember clearly that a few months ago, some Israel representatives stated that when they have done with Iran, they will move to attack Pakistan, because Pakistan is the next on the list. We cannot, of course, we cannot know for sure if this is really the strategy, although it was stated publicly. And of course, Pakistan is also a country with a nuclear program, and therefore is perceived probably by Israel as a threat. Therefore, I think that this common threat coming from Israel is bringing these two countries together right now. Although, of course, they are also competitors. They might have with ethnic minority, border ethnic minority, they had some clashes, they had some problems. But in this moment, I think they have other priorities. And so I don't think that Iran sees this defense agreement as a threat. Moreover, is not something new. I mean, the relation between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan is a long-standing relation, and they have cooperated since decades. And when it comes to Europe, I don't know if, of course, I don't think even that there weren't statements since now that they welcome some sort of Islamic countries or Arab countries, NATO version, or them moving away from the Western security infrastructure. So I think that this might be scaring for them, but they should also endorse the security, the fear that this country, I mean, what they experience right now, they have been attacked. They see Qatar have been attacked. They see Yemen have been attacked. Lebanon have been attacked. Gaza. I mean, and they don't feel they have been they have been enough security guarantee by the historical country who was in charge of their protection, which is the US. And there wasn't also some kind of condemnation coming from Europe. So I think that with this in mind, they understood that they are not 100% safe anymore. So they have to reorganize with regional power to coexist, and I can foresee that this will bring them also more close to Iran, probably, although the competition remains, although the ideological differences remain. But I mean, they have now geopolitical priorities. And I will conclude by saying that there is another point in which they align not only the problems with Israel right now, but both Iran and Saudi Arabia, Pakistan also with mainly Chinese also investment. They have all worked to improve their economies, to establish regional corridors, pipelines, and so on. And of course, for this to work, they need stability. We see Saudi Arabia has launched Saudi Vision 2030. We see Iran with all its economic free zones, industrial free zones. We see the international North-South transport corridor, which involved a lot of regional actors. if there is no stability, this will not work. So they made a choice. Instead of continuing confronting each other, they try to restore relation and to stabilize the region and give priority to economy. Of course, right now in this specifically from this specific point of view, Israel is acting as a destabilizing actor from their perspective. And therefore, I think that there will be some kind of cooperation between them.
And your point of view, Dr. Sika, if you would like to contribute?
Yes, Silvia just mentioned very correctly, because when Mohammed bin Salman was appointed for example, 3-4 years, he just adopted and some kind of aggressive foreign policy. Just you can look at the invasion on Yemen for years. But after that, in the past 3-4 years, he just adopted some completely different foreign policy, some kind of economically benefit driven foreign policy. So from his point of view, from 3-4 years ago until now, economic benefits is his very first priority. So every single event or every single country that destabilize the region, for now it's of course Israel, so it can it can frustrate MBS easily. And at this point, I don't see at all this agreement between Pakistan and Israel a threat to Iran. It's just a signal, a sign to Israel that you are the main danger. And just remember, before the invasion on Qatar, MBS was some kind of passive and silent. And it was somehow surprising for me, and because I was expected from him, some kind of active and much more participatory point of view. But after Qatar, I think this agreement cannot be accidental. It's a sign of, concern towards it, about Israel. And yes, that's it.
My last question, Dr. Silvia, to you is that you have mentioned about that by agreeing to restarting the negotiations with IAEA, President Pezeshkian has basically enabled himself as a one who basically implemented his campaign promises. Then there are the issues of economic situation, and by negotiating with the IAEA, Iran can expect that its diplomatic buffer zone could be enhanced, as well as its image would be boosted, and it could prevent itself from the future attack by Israel or the US. But all of these variables have been tested before as well. And during the Iran-Israel conflict, there was an enormous amount of public pressure on the Pezeshkian government to seek the nuclearization of the country from the conservatives, from the hardliners, from the moderates, reformists, or from the one who can be considered as liberals, who do not basically align with the current Islamic system, but they are basically nationalist. So all of the factors of the society, segments of the society, basically push the Pezeshkian government or the Iranian state towards nuclearization. So, how do you think that despite having the public pressure and despite testing all these variables before, what has basically pushed the Iranian foreign minister or Pezeshkian government to seek re-engagement with IAEA when there is the disagreement in the Iranian parliament as well?
Well, first of all, as I already mentioned, he made a promise during his campaign. He knows that he has been elected by the people for this purpose, although I mean, not the majority of the country would say is not that the entire country went to vote, but I mean, at least this was the result. And this is what the people were seeking. And in Iran, we saw that the country has been destabilized multiple times by protests. So it is really important for the president now to address this request made by its population. Of course, it's not a lone country, a lone man, in power. He has to respond to the different centers of power inside the countries. We have the hardliners, we have the reformists, we have the supreme leader, we have the revolutionary guard, we have the economic, the stakeholders. So of course, it's a balance. And right now we see a really heated debate, I would say, inside Iran. If we read the news right now in the Iranian media, the debate is really heated. And so I would say it's not so sure how they will welcome the outcome of this negotiation. I mean, at least some part of the society, like the hardline, like the parliament, who was against. So the legislative power was against this agreement. And most of all, how I would say this internal debate has the power to stall the negotiation. Because from one side, we have Europe, which is stressing Iran is not doing enough. Although the Cairo agreement, although this framework, which was decided together with Grossi, Europe is still saying Tehran is not doing enough. On the other side, we have the lawmakers, the parliament, who is saying to Pezeshkian, wait a minute, we will not tell them where is the enriched uranium, what was the fate of the enriched uranium and of the facility who were bombed by the United States, because this is our leverage and because they might share this information with Israel intelligence. So the situation is quite controversial. But again, I think that Pezeshkian wants to first of all, of course, to respect the agenda and what the population is asking. He knows that he might lose the power. The Islamic, actually, the entire revolutionary class might lose power inside the country if they don't address the people's needs. And his government, under the leadership of the supreme leader, as the Raisi government did, they are seeking economic relief. It's really a priority right now because this is what drives the discontent of the people. We saw protests about women freedom and so on, but I can tell you that the economic issue is really the priority right now of the discontent, of driving the discontent in the country. So for the president, if he achieve an agreement with Europe, and maybe the sanction will be relief, and this will bring, of course, wellness, some kind of wellness or relief to the country, he will gain a lot of support inside the country. And this will, of course, decrease the support for the hardliners. On the other side, I think it's also a matter of balance of powers because the hardliners, after the Israeli offensive, they gain a lot of support because a lot of people who weren't that supportive to this kind of harsh position, now after what they experienced, of course, they change their mind. And so I think being the president a reformist, he has also to bring some success on his side and decrease all the support that the other faction has gained. And I think that he's trying to do this. Whether this will work, I don't know. It depends also of the attitude coming from the European Union and also from the US, because we see right now that Iran is willing to negotiate with Europe, but actually not with the US, maybe not with Washington after what happened. And I mean, they have been bombed. I can understand. Uh, it's not said that this will have a positive outcome, but I really suggest that we have to look inside the internal politics on Iran to understand what is going on and not always think about relation with the US, relation with Europe. It's also a matter of balance of power inside the country and who is gaining the support and at the end of the day maintaining the people's support and avoid the collapse what is trying the Western world is trying to do openly, trying to make the Islamic Republic collapse from within by pushing the people to protest.
And can I add a point if possible?
Yes, for sure. Yes, for sure. And may I
Uh,
club this with with my last question to you, Dr. Sika, as well, so you may conclude.
for sure, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So my last question to you, Dr. Sika, and it would also answer one of the query by one of the participant, Mr. Arman Wazir. Um, in the case of Ukraine, we have seen that Europe has been snubbed by Trump, by the US. And in the case of Iran, as you mentioned, US has not treated Europe equally. So, what do you think it would cause some sort of strategic rethinking in the wider calculus of European policy making circles, or do you think that the Europe would continue to adhere itself with the U.S. geopolitical security and ideological goals? What are your takes on this?
I don't think first I just add my point and then I just answer your question. Regarding the hardliners in Iran, I think they especially at this time, at this very, I mean, crucial time, they just say something for the domestic audience, and maybe behind the scene they are some kind of, consensus between all different branches of political power in Iran. As far as I know, the political culture of the Iranian officials. So just remember that point as well. So to me, it seems that the next week's President Pezeshkian's bilateral meetings with with his European counterparts could be very important. And just remember that Iranians are very good last minute negotiators. So just remember this as well. So everything for now is totally unpredictable. So the next weeks to me it's very crucial and of great importance. So let's get back to your question. Unfortunately, as I mentioned during my presentation slides, because of the lack of material tools, I mean financial leverage and all the other kind of tools. For me, I don't want to be pessimist, but for me, at least in the short term or even middle term, Europe cannot take some kind of independent approach towards even Ukraine crisis or even the problem of Iran's nuclear program. But remember, just let me finish with the point. One can ask himself why Europe's increasingly, adopted rigid approach toward Iran at least in recent months. The very primary answer is the issue of Ukraine, of course, and Iran's. In Europe's point of view, Iran's military support for Russia in this war, notably through provision of drones. Because for Europe, the Ukraine crisis constitutes existential threat, and Iran's stance toward the conflict has led the European actors to attribute, part of the responsibility for this existential threat to Iran. So when someone think about the rigid approach of European leaders in the recent months, we should not, forget the way of the issue, the Ukraine crisis in this regard. So to me, it seems that unfortunately, in the short term or middle term, especially during the second terms of President Trump's presidency, for me, it's not probable for Europe to adopt some kind of independent approach in foreign policy, especially toward Middle East.
Dr. Sika, Ms. Silvia, thank you so much for participating in our webinar. It was indeed a quite healthy, comprehensive, and thought-provoking discussions. On the behalf of the Institute, I thank both of the speakers as well as the audience for participating in this webinar. We are truly enriched by the discussion, and it would basically enable us to cultivate some sort of the points in the form of report and in the form of policy briefs. and I would definitely share the recording of this event once it is uploaded on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much, Dr. Sika, and thank you so much, Ms. Silvia.
Thank you so
Thanks for the
much.
invitation.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.